Let's bring in our White House correspondent, Monica Alba. And Monica, you were watching along with everyone. And it was actually our colleague Gabe Gutierrez's question to Karoline Leavitt regarding the comments made by members of his administration, where we saw Leavitt, it seemed pretty clear to me, distance the president from the comments that many members of his staff have made in the wake of this shooting.
It's very notable, Ryan, you're right to point that out, because we do have an exact example to contrast this with. Just a couple of weeks ago, after the death of Renee Good, who was shot and killed by an ICE officer in Minneapolis, we had an entire briefing that was led by Vice President Vance. You had top officials labeling her a domestic terrorist without providing any evidence for that claim, and really defending the ICE officer in that specific instance. Fast forward to today, where you are seeing a very different approach and strategy from the White House. The fact that the press secretary, Karoline Leavitt, repeatedly said that the president believes there needs to be an investigation before he or the White House can weigh in on questions like whether it was appropriate for Stephen Miller to make those comments in this case as well, or whether even the DHS official statement that came out in the minutes and hours after Saturday's shooting was appropriate, because it accused Alex Pretti of potentially wanting to commit, quote, a massacre against law enforcement. Karoline Leavitt today saying that she could not defend those claims, saying that she could not speak to whether the president believed those claims were appropriate. And I do think that tells you a lot about this moment for this particular White House and for this president, who today made two really significant moves that signal that they are trying to perhaps take a different tack here. And that is sending Tom Homan to Minneapolis, the border czar, somebody who has not been involved intricately in the way that others in the top levels of government have been so far, but somebody who has been key on other aspects of immigration strategy. And then you have the president calling Governor Tim Walz, having a phone conversation with him after weeks of very critical comments from both men going back and forth, essentially accusing one another of not doing their job, of failing to live up to their own commitment to Americans here, with the president now saying he had a very good call with him and that he believes they will have future conversations, and that there could be the possibility of reducing the footprint of federal agents on the ground in Minneapolis as a result of this conversation. The president said that he believes that Tom Homan will be welcome there by the governor, that he said that was a good move, and that they can agree to perhaps just have a different approach as to the way that they are carrying out some of these immigration enforcement operations. Now, certainly, you did continue to hear Ryan blame for those Democratic officials. The White House does continue to stress that they believe the governor and the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, need to be doing more to cooperate with federal officials. That has been a consistent through line that you've heard for the last couple of weeks, and that certainly was repeated today. But I think you just can't overstate enough how much of a shift this appears to be from a president who just last night told the Wall Street Journal he wasn't ready to make any kind of conclusions here or assessments based on what we saw on Saturday, saying again that he believes a full investigation needs to play out. And he says his administration is, quote, looking at everything. Ryan. Yeah, and I do think that's significant that they are opening the door to a full investigation, and have even suggested that local officials could be involved in that investigation, so that there are a separate pair of eyes that are looking at all the evidence involved in this shooting. The other thing that I thought was interesting, Monica, that played out during this press briefing was there were repeated questions from the reporters in the room as to whether or not the president has confidence in his leadership team on the ground in Minnesota, particularly the DHS Secretary, Kristi Noem. And Leavitt said that the president still has confidence in her, but it didn't seem to be an overwhelming endorsement, especially given the fact that Homan is going to be set to Minnesota. What should we take about that, and just a broader leadership team that has been involved in what's happening there in Minneapolis? Yeah, Karoline Leavitt did say that at this moment, that Secretary Noem still has the, quote, full trust and confidence of the president. But as we know, these things can shift. And certainly for now, they are backing her as the leader of the Department of Homeland Security. But you can't interpret this move of sending Tom Homan as being in part, at least, due to the fact that there is some dissatisfaction with the way that things have been running up until this point. And you did have the DHS Secretary secretary over the weekend, making various comments, similar comments to some of the things we heard out of Stephen Miller. Again, she made those claims about Alex Pretti, and there were repeated claims that didn't necessarily have any, again, evidence to back them up. But at the same time, she's not the one who has been there day to day. Instead, that has been somebody called Greg Bovino, who is a key figure for Customs and Border Patrol. And he is somebody who was dispatched there with a record number of federal agents who were surged to Minneapolis and to Minnesota in recent weeks. And so there's also a question, Ryan, about whether there are some concerns about the way that he has been carrying out his work. And there was also, I think, a question in the briefing as to whether he has left Minnesota or whether he will be leaving Minnesota soon. And again, whether Tom Homan, it seems, is going to be in charge of how things go day to day. But for now, the leadership structure as it stands in these key posts is staying in place. But I do think this does call into question also a little bit of the positioning of Stephen Miller, of the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, who it is hard, again, to overstate how critical he is to the immigration strategy overall of this White House and this administration. He is a key architect in all of that. But today, it really struck me that this was a White House press secretary who said that she couldn't necessarily back what he had said over the weekend. She was asked specifically whether he needs to apologize to the parents of Alex Pretti for what he said, and she didn't address that specifically.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.